Hello, my name is Haley House, and today I'll be presenting my ecological interaction project. In the case of my research, I chose to study Vinland Park here in Fresno, which is a good 10 to 15-minute drive from Fresno State. In the case of my ecological project, the animals that were studied were the fox squirrel, or Cirrus niger, and the mourning dove, or Zenaida micura. As for the plant species involved within this project, they were the white mulberry tree, or Morus alba, eucalyptus with the scientific name eucalyptus, and the Mexican weeping pine, otherwise known as Pinus spatula. The following videos after this slide are several clip videos I took of the ecological interactions between the species as well as plant species as a part of the project in order to study the interactions of fox squirrels and mourning doves. As you can see in this video, there are two groups of squirrels here, one that is by the mulberry tree and one by the surrounding tree in the back. Unfortunately, I did not classify this tree as it was not very impromptu with the project, as only some squirrels interacted with it, and as I got closer for some of these videos, some squirrels and birds did end up moving away a bit from my presence. As you can see here, the squirrel is currently foraging on the floor underneath the mulberry tree as it relies on its pods for food, exhibiting a form of commensalism between the tree and the fox squirrel. Once again, here's a closer look of that squirrel as it's foraging, as it's just kind of opening up the pods in order to eat them from the mulberry tree above. So after going over the videos and looking over, there is some significance showing that there is some commensalism between fox squirrels and white mulberry trees. If you're unaware of what commensalism is basically that the squirrel benefits from the tree without directly harming the tree. In this case, it relies on the tree's seed pods in order for a source of food. Like mentioned before in the first video, that there were squirrels that were on another separate tree in the background, kind of showing how squirrel habitats vary and can live in different trees, including things such as pine. Unfortunately, I was unable to get any videos of any squirrels on pine trees. It was more so as soon as I tried to pull up my phone, they would already just disappear. In this video, it's kind of hard to see in the background, but there are groups of mourning doves foraging on the ground underneath the mulberry tree as well. This was in a mulberry tree that was in the distance, however. Whereas the first videos showing of squirrels was in a mulberry tree that was in much closer range. As you can see in the back, you can see all these small little movements here. These are all the mourning doves as they are foraging. As you can see in this video was taken earlier, where the mourning doves and the squirrels are somewhat interacting with each other as they are kind of coexisting with each other around this mulberry tree, foraging for the seed pods. While I was there and recording, there were no actual fights or interactions between the two. It was more so that they were, well, in layman terms, very chill with each other. There was very little to any interaction as they were both foraging for food. So some of the observed significance that were noted for the mourning doves is that there was a bit of cohabitation, as I mentioned before, between the mourning doves and the fox squirrels. It is not that they were afraid of each other, it was rather they were very chill with each other's existence and went about their day as they were foraging for the seeds and pods underneath the tree. Like the fox squirrels, the mourning doves did also rely on the tree for food source and a sort of commensalism without directly harming the tree. Lastly, they mostly traveled in groups. As compared to the squirrels, they were very much singled out or on their own most of the time. It is important to note that in some of these videos, it was very hard to catch much interactions of all of them together, as every time I got closer to the tree, a bunch of them would start to leave. A little bit of habitat observation. It was really important to note that some of the mourning doves' nests were found in the eucalyptus trees at the outskirts of the park. Knowing this kind of provides the population index on specific species on where they live. In this case, specifically for mourning doves, it was important to note that the eucalyptus tree was also very close to the mulberry tree, which probably was why there are so many birds here in the first place for this tree specifically. As for the squirrels, as I mentioned before, they can be found in the pine trees, in this case, the Mexican weeping pine. However, I was really unable to get any photos of this because every time I would ever try to take a photo, it would immediately run up and then I would never be able to find it. As for the white mulberry tree, same situation as well, unfortunately. It is also important to note that much of the wildlife found in this park was slightly limited, and that is mostly because it is an urbanized park where there is housing units on the outskirts of this park, as well as a school. So basically, much of the wildlife was limited as there was some people that were also walking around the park. I tried to find sections within this park that are very isolated away from people in order to ensure any interference between the public as well as the species and animals that were currently living there. So as you can see here, we have two different trees here. We have the white mulberry tree, as I referenced before. This is in a lot of the videos where much of the foraging was taking place, where a lot of food sources taking place. Basically, it was between this tree and then the other white mulberry tree in the background. Over here is the Mexican weeping pine. Like I said before, I couldn't really get that many pictures of squirrels on them just because a lot of them would scurry right up when I was about to take a photo. However, linkage of this is I did notice that a lot of squirrels were coming in and out of these trees, which was basically just kind of a note that this could possibly be a main habitat area for these for fox squirrels, um, like how eucalyptus are for the mourning doves. So as you can see here, this was the eucalyptus tree that was by the mulberry tree that much of the recordings were taken from. And within this tree, as I mentioned before, were some nests. And in this case, this is a mourning dove nest. It was located a little bit over here on the tree. There was some that were over here as well. This kind of just giving show of evidence of habitats within this tree, specifically the mourning dove population in this park, and it is quite a fascinating sight to see. Now, after looking at all of that, there was one question I did think to myself, and that is what would happen if we took away the mulberry tree and how it would affect the current ecological environment that the fox squirrel and the mourning dove reside in. A little bit of what we know is that much of the foraging takes energy in order to successfully collect food, so depending on how easy it is to extract the food would be much more favored by the species than the other. So for example, in the case of squirrels, between fruits and nuts, they would prefer the fruits over the nuts as it's easier to eat and store, compared to that as nuts you have to go through several steps in order to access what they need to eat. So for fox squirrels, they do prefer foods such as nuts and seeds. However, they are very much adaptable eaters when it comes to park settings. So this can include things such as pine cones, as well specifically that of male pine. For the mourning doves, it is important to note that their nests already exist in some of the eucalyptus on the outskirts of this park. So knowing this sort of detail, it kind of just gives an idea of where they would choose more of a habitat to live in. So I proposed this hypothesis. By removing mulberry tree plants from the surrounding environment over time, behavioral evolution will occur that makes fox squirrels and mourning doves change their diet. If this is correct, then there will be a gradual increase of seeds and pods consumed from trees such as the eucalyptus and the Mexican weeping pine. So a little bit on how I would conduct this experiment is first I would create sectioned off places within the park in order to create different samples to study. So first allowing the control section to include the mulberry tree to add as a comparison for the rest, while the other sections would be eucalyptus without any contact with the mulberry tree, and the Mexican weeping pine without any contact with the mulberry tree as well. It's important to note that some of these gridded off sections I would prefer to have further from the tree as to not disturb much of the actual environment that exist within this experimental phase, and also not to disturb the mulberry tree as well, since completely removing the tree would affect the nature of the actual park. Second, after setting up this method, I would record the total number of animals, specifically that of the fox squirrels and the mourning doves that eat from this tree, including variables of the species of tree, such as what type it is, like example, white mulberry, eucalyptus, Mexican weeping pine, as well as the number of presence of fox squirrels and the presence of mourning doves. This would be interpreted into an ANOVA graph, with each section being its own plot. For example, having a separate section for Mexican weeping pine versus the presence of squirrels, or Mexican weeping pine versus the presence of mourning doves. It just adds a little bit of difference in order for comparison. Additionally, I would also record any other interactions, including the number of species inhabitants of the tree. As I mentioned before, a lot of the presence of mourning dove nests were found within the eucalyptus tree, so this is just to add a little bit towards the towards a correction for any bias within the population difference that enter and exit these trees for your food source or habitats. This can also open up a secondary conversation for an experiment involving the choice of habitat. However, the more focal point with this experiment is towards understanding how the change of food and collection would work between the species and the plants that they live in and or visit. So what is to be expected from this experiment? A little bit that I expected were more so the majority of seed and pod consumption would be by fox squirrels. And this is because when it comes to foraging theory, species such as squirrels have a tendency to go for food that requires less energy to collect, as I mentioned before with the fruit and nut example. As a result, pine cones from the Mexican weeping pine would have a much lower consumption from fox squirrels compared to eucalyptus blossoms. As for the mourning doves, they would have a much higher population density within eucalyptus trees, and this is due to the evidence of them nesting within these trees already. Another thing with them nesting in eucalyptus is that they can also be found on the residing on larger limbs of the eucalyptus tree, specifically that near the ground. But this is more so for like much smaller trees. As for the mulberry data, I would also expect it to be very much higher. And this is just because in this form of the experiment, we're not completely removing the tree from the environment. However, this would probably be very different on the data scale if it were to be completely removed from the park entirely, which would show much more of a dramatic shift in behavioral evolution amongst the species. Lastly, here is my works cited, and thank you for watching. I hope you have a good day.